On our broadcast here tonight, a milestone for the American economy. Question is, how many Americans will feel what happened today? The gathering storm over nuclear terrorism and who the president has called together to deal with it. Family ties, the uproar grows over that boy sent back to Russia by his adoptive mother. And behind bars, keeping little children with their mothers as a debt to society gets repaid. Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. You might not have been aware of it. There's a very good chance you didn't feel anything when it happened late today. But when the closing bell sounded on Wall Street this afternoon, a milestone was reached. The Dow closed above 11,000. Now, the experts are fond of using terms like breaking through the 11,000 barrier to describe what happened today. But how will it help the millions of Americans who couldn't feel any farther away from Wall Street in economic terms because they're in the grips of an economic downturn and high unemployment? It's where we begin tonight with David Faber of CNBC. And David, we have a graphic I want to show you. It shows three big events, really, starting with the last time we were here at 11,000. Then the big dip, of course, is 9/11. Strong run up to 14,000 back in 07. The economic crash, March 9th, about exactly a year ago. Here we are at 11,000. Question is, what does it mean?
Yeah, well, of course it is only a number, Brian. But that being said, it is certainly indicative of how far we've come in the last year. A little over a year ago, panic reigned to a large extent in our financial markets. There was great concern about our economy, and that was reflected in a Dow that was at 6,600. Hadn't been there in 12 years. We've come a long way since then. But unfortunately, a lot of people who watched this show, who looked at their 401ks or IRAs a year ago, may have said, I've had enough. I haven't made any money. I've lost money over the last 10 years. It's not clear to me that the individual investor has benefited that much from this rally we've seen this last year, indicated by how few shares have been traded each day on Wall Street. Not typical amounts for a rally of this type.
I'm looking at the copy of Newsweek magazine out today. It says America's back. And we have this classic disconnect. We hear numbers out of Wall Street. We see covers of magazines like that. People watching at home, millions of people in the grips of unemployment and poor financial times, wondering when they're going to start feeling some of this.
And that's the key question for this economy. Far be it from me to seem unpatriotic, but one has to wonder in some ways. Economic growth from here is going to be dependent in part on the U.S. consumer. 70% of our economy is consumer spending. Unemployment still remains very, very high. We're going to hear a lot from corporate America in the next few weeks about how much money corporations made, because they have done well. That's why the stock market has been up. But they've done well in part because of productivity gains. They fired a lot of people in 2008 and 2009. They found they can do more with less. The question will be when those corporations actually get back to hiring.
And this is why we turn to you, David Faber from CNBC. Thank you, as always, reporting on tonight's latest economic numbers. In Washington tonight, 47 world leaders have gathered for a summit on the most serious of topics, nuclear security and the worry and instability that can come from fearing some nuclear materials could be out there loose. Our chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd, is covering for us tonight. Chuck, good evening.
Well, good evening, Brian. The president is using his international bully pulpit to focus the world and America on what they believe is the #1 danger in the world right now, nuclear terrorism. The leaders gathered as news emerged that Pakistan is expanding its nuclear program, even as it struggles with terrorist camps hiding within its own borders. The administration says the Pakistanis insist their stockpile is secure, but privately the administration has its doubts. Some experts agree.
But for my money, Pakistan is the most dangerous country on earth. And it has Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, in the country about 60 kilometers away from the nuclear facilities.
The nuclear fuel in question, highly enriched uranium. It's used in power plants and can be used to make nuclear weapons. The problem is securing it.
It is our most preventable threat. You lock up the material, the uranium, the plutonium, and you prevent the terrorists from getting the one thing they can't make themselves.
Leaders from countries with large nuclear programs, Russia, Great Britain, France, and China, and with limited programs, India and Pakistan, are here. The administration is urging countries to use nuclear fuel in their power plants that's harder to weaponize. It also wants more secure facilities for weaponized fuel. Today, Ukraine accepted the idea.
This is something that the United States has tried to make happen for more than 10 years.
But securing that former Soviet republic's nuclear material could become an American burden. The administration has left open the door for storing the fuel in this country.
When forced with the choice of having that material stored safely here or taking the risk that it may or may not be secured somewhere else, particularly in highly volatile regions in the world, our choice quite clearly is to have that here.
Now, the president has spent a lot of time in one-on-one meetings before the start of this summit, the most important of which was a 90-minute session with the head of China, where they've gotten some commitment, Brian, that China will not veto any effort in the United Nations to issue new, tougher sanctions against Iran. We just don't know the level of toughness.
Our Chief White House correspondent covering tonight in Washington, Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks. And